Okay, welcome to our third talk in a row of talks guiding the exhibition Eco Games in the current gameplay exhibition at the ZKM Karlsruhe. In this series of talks, we want to focus on the topic of eco games. And today I have the great honor to have Chris Crawford as my guest. Chris Crawford is a cornerstone of the game designer scene. He has been designing and developing computer games since the late 1970s, and he founded the Journal of Computer Game Design and what has become the most important conference for digital game development, the Game Developers Conference, the GDC. He's not only a pioneer in the field of game development, but was also one of the first to address the connection between ecological issues and digital games. Welcome, Chris Crawford.
Hi there.
Chris, you were instrumental in developing the foundations of what we now call classic games in a pioneering era of digital games. And the themes of your games were quite often warlike simulations like Tactics or Legionnaire, but also with ecological themes and topics like in Balance of the Planet and Energy Tsar. How did you come to work on these two different themes, and what role did these themes play for you in the 1980s?
Well, there were actually three threads that came together. The first was playing board war games in the 1970s. I did that for recreation. However, the second thread was I was in the Vietnam generation, and we were all very concerned about the war in Vietnam, but even more concerned about nuclear war. I was brought up in a period when nuclear war was considered to be a very real possibility. I remember when I was 13 years old, we had 12 years old, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we came very close to nuclear war, and we were all quite frightened by that. And so that was the second thread. The third thread for me was I got a job just before I joined Atari. My job was teaching people about environmental issues. And as part of that job, I studied a great many materials about environmental issues and learned a great deal about the subject. So I had a broad base of knowledge about energy and environmental issues.
Okay. So it was. Is there a game about the Cold War as well? About the atomic danger, nuclear danger?
Balance of Power was about the Cold War, and it was my most commercially successful game.
Yeah.
So because it did do a fairly good job of capturing the basic dynamics of the conflict between the USA and the Soviet Union.
Okay. You mentioned you had knowledge on all the ecological topics before you started inventing computer games. Did I get this right? Okay. In your game Balance of the Planet, it deals with managing the resources, and one learning from playing the game, at least for me, was to recognize the complexity of the different influences you put in your game. It's highly complex, and when you start changing the values, you can see it glitches out of your hands, and you have no control at all anymore. Yeah, at least this was my experience I had, which is really, exactly showing how complicated and how difficult it is. As game designers, we have different approaches to create a game. Factors like fun, experiencing interesting stories, and teaching knowledge, enjoying a special art style, etc., are really important in different proportions, and you put a lot of development energy in this game. And what was your main intention and motivation while creating Balance of the Planet?
Well, in fact, it was the complexity that was my communicating the complexity of the problem was my primary goal. That is, I was distressed by the fact that so many people had such simplistic views of the environmental problems, and they would focus on one point and then make that the only consideration. And that's why we haven't solved our problems. There's so many factors that have to be combined to create a workable solution. And people just weren't doing that. They did not realize, well, there are economic factors that you have to take into account. There are supply issues. There are pollution issues. They all connect. And that was the whole point of Balance of the Planet. You simply had to take into account all of these considerations.
Mm-hmm. I think in your game, like usually when we design a game, it's really important that we give players the situation where the player has at least the imagination, he or she is able to control something or change something. And in fact, in your game, I experienced the situation that I lose control on it because it's so high complex. So it's completely the other way around, and this makes it really interesting at least from my perspective. Your game was created in the early 1990s of the last.
Yeah, it was published for Earth Day 1990. So it was actually published on April 1st, 1990.
April 1st, 1990. What do you think? Is it still relevant for current discussions? And what is the power of video games and or nonlinear storytelling? Because this is one of your focus right now in changing the world. So what is the power of?
Well, the primary power is to communicate the processes involved. And this is a lesson that educational software designers still have not truly understood. That is, fundamental question. What is reality? Is reality a collection of objects or a system of processes? Most people see reality as a collection of objects. There's nuclear energy, there's trees, there's rivers, there's planets, there's computers. There are all of these objects. Mm-hmm. But really, I perceive the universe as a system of processes. There are all of these things taking place that are affecting each other. It's a very different point of view. And it is essential to understanding a lot of the things that are going on. Fundamentally, the environmental problems we are having now, and especially the climate change problem, these are fundamentally about processes that are taking place. And you cannot address these problems unless you understand the processes. Having a list of objects, like how many coal-burning power plants there are, and how many solar systems we have. That doesn't really address the problem. To address the problem, you've got to understand how these things work and how they interact with the environment. And that was the main point I wanted to make. Another point that I try to put into all of my designs is a fundamental rule of life that I believe in, and that is, it's always more complicated than you thought. And most people don't appreciate that. That's a variation on the concept of the more I learn, the less I know. It's everything is really complicated. So and you got to respect that.
It's not keep it simple, it's keep it complex or keep it complicated in a way.
Actually, you don't want it to make it too complicated because
Mm-hmm.
then it's just totally confusing.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make it complicated enough
Mm-hmm.
to scare the player, to make the player aware of the difficulties, but you don't want to pull completely away from them. And that's a tricky balancing act because for some people, even this much difference is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And other people can handle this much difference. So
Mm-hmm.
you just have to find what you think is somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, but the words complex and complicated, it's two different words and two different meanings. So I receive your games as a complex games, not complicated games, because they are
Okay.
not
Yes.
complicated. Yeah, they are really complex because there are so many factors influencing each other, and
Yes. Good point.
this is I I agree that games are the perfect media to serve complex and to address complex topics, because we already have in all the structures and in your storytelling structure, we have networks rather than linear structures. Yeah, we have all this. We can directly put these complex systems into our media. Yeah.
I'd like to expand on this point. If you think there's knowledge and there's understanding, knowledge is an accumulation of facts. Facts are objects. Understanding is a way of grasping the processes. And unfortunately, most educational games teach knowledge. They give you lots of facts about the world, but it should be about the processes. And the problem here is that processes are expressed in the computer through algorithms. And the language of algorithms is mathematics. And that right there is what destroys most games. A lot of designers are really reluctant to use basic elementary mathematics. Balance of the Planet used only almost entirely simple linear equations.
Mm.
X equals or Y equals AX plus B. That's it. There were some square roots. There were a couple of exponentials in there, but I mean, this is secondary school stuff. This is not college level mathematics, and yet I have been fighting this battle for decades, trying to get people, please use some math, and they say, oh, gee, I don't know. And they end up doing these simple Boolean expressions.
Mm.
If they do this, then we do that. If they
Mm.
do that, then we do this. And it's all if then statements or switch statements, stuff
Mm.
like that. And it's that's just not good enough to explain processes.
Mhm. Okay. Uh, yeah, think about this process, but I will come with my next question also to one high
Sure.
complex issue. We are really happy to show your game Balance of the Planet in our exhibition. And I already saw a father playing with his son last week. They were playing your game, and while the son was trying to figure out what kind of impact he can manage with changing the values in your game, the father told him about the ecological movement in the late 70s and 80s, and later the founding of the Green Party in Germany. In the same time the game was published, so they immediately got the connection that this was this happened in the same time. So this is almost 40 years ago, or Balance of the Planet was in the 90s, so it's 30 years ago. Long time ago. This knowledge and also the complexity was already there. Yeah, we have the limitation of growth, the Club of Rome manifest from 72. So this was already there. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recently published his current climate report. And we have already...
downloaded it about 2 hours ago.
Yeah, it's a really, really fresh information. And they collected over several years, they collected all the scientific results regarding climate change, and they digested it and put a digestion together as a report to politicians, how to react and how to change the politics right now. We have already reached the global warming from 1.1 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial age. And you are personally really deep into it, and you're watching this development for a long time now. What do you personally think in the time you created your game? Was it already too late to save the planet? Because this was my expression when I played it, because it's so hard to get good values out of your game. So when you developed your game, did you already think it's already too late to save the planet for humankind at least? Or is there still hope to change human behavior towards a stable and balanced planet?
In 1990, when I published Balance of the Planet, we definitely had a good shot at fixing the problem. The Kyoto protocols at the time were an excellent starting point. If we had simply followed up on that and made decent political progress, I think we'd be in good shape to really beat this problem. Now, I believe it is too late. We are going to suffer enormous losses because of the failures of the last 30 years. I believe that basically the political decisions made over the last 30 years have been completely inadequate. Germany is way ahead of everybody else, but America is the situation in America is atrocious and shameful. I wish more people had played my game back then, but we are now at the point, I actually don't think that climate change will in and of itself destroy civilization. I think it will place economic stress that is so great that it will create much political instability. And when we combine this with a great many other factors, I will tell you my very pessimistic assessment that I do not think that this planet will have any civilization on it by the year 2100. There will still be lots of human beings, but no civilization. So sorry to be telling you the bad news, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, okay. I was asking you for your opinion, and I'm afraid that it's not that far away from the reality we will experience. But to try to bring some optimistic point as well into this, do you have any idea how games could guide this process, or be to bring the topics more into focus, that we can get the change faster? Do you have ideas how games could do that?
Games really should be our primary medium of education. This is a key point that I think few people appreciate. School is a lousy way to teach people because it's not suited to the human mind. The human mind, the whole concept of education developed when mammals arose and began using and had 4 legs, and they had to figure out how to move them in different patterns. And that couldn't be stored in genes. Reptiles, they're born with the ability to walk. A lizard comes out of an egg and immediately runs away. A horse is born and I don't know how to do it. And they have to play to learn how to move properly, how to get all those different patterns working. All mammals learn by playing. Play is the fundamental educational medium. And in fact, humans have always learned via play. And then we invented school. School has the advantage that it is economically efficient. That is, you get one teacher and 30 students, and boy, that's efficient, but it's not terribly effective. School, and I say this having been a teacher for many years, school doesn't work very well. Play works beautifully when it's done right. And the games are the perfect way to do this if the games are designed effectively. I believe that people learned more about geopolitics in the 1980s from my game Balance of Power than they did from newspaper reports. In the same way, I think most people can learn a great deal more about environmental issues by playing Balance of the Planet. And we should have thousands of these games. And yet, after all these years, by the way, people realized that computers could be great educational devices as early as the late 1950s. They were working on stuff like this. We've been working on this stuff for 60 years now. And we still have very little in the way of good educational software. Most of it just says, okay, we're going to teach you some more facts. And we don't need facts. We need to understand the processes at work. So, yeah, we need a lot more educational games.
Did you, I'm not sure how connected in the game development scene you are right now and how many interactions with other game developers you have right now, but do you experience that some game developers are going into this direction, that they put at least some ecological, even if it's just tangential in the games, but can you experience something like that?
Well, first, my interactions with the game development community are now very, very few. The problem is that, every now and then somebody will send me an email saying, oh, Chris, you got to see this. It's really great. Boy, this is revolutionary. And I go and I look at it and I say, oh, yeah. Well, this uses one idea that was in 1987. And it also has an idea that was done in 1993 with a little bit of something from 1997. And I just don't see anything. There are a few things that are new, but most of the advances are not at the design concept. They're technical advances, improvements in the graphics, the animation, the sound, and so forth. But at the deep design, at the architectural level, I just don't see much change. I do see a deep desire to advance the medium. People are really, the amount of experimentation going on is very impressive. It's just that that experimentation is still within a very narrow mindset. People have a very narrow concept of what a game could be. And so they're in this little world and they're trying to do all sorts of creative things in this tiny world. And if they could just break out of it and go into this larger universe, and I will say mathematics is a major part of breaking out of it, not the only part necessary.
And I think this is also one of the powers of games, that they, even if the mechanic is a really, really simple one, you walk around and you collect things, or maybe you craft something, so really, really simple mechanics, but it can still give you an experience on something. And especially Walden, I think, gives you the feeling of being connected to wildlife in a way. And this is also what's in all the, you're able to read letters in the game, and you read Platon, the state. And so you have many different texts you can read in game, which brings you in a mindset, at least, which let you feel to be connected with nature. So I think this is also one of the powers of gaming. Yeah.
Let me give you a very simple example of how confined the thinking is. Almost every single game ever created has somewhere in it a map That is, almost all games use spatial reasoning in some way. Now, in many cases, the map is right up on the screen. In other cases, it's hidden, but it's still in there. And the player must think in spatial terms, must think about where I am and where other things are and so forth. Why do we need to do that? There's absolutely no need for a game to use spatial elements. There are a zillion things you can do that don't have any spatial components, and yet it locks people's minds in to think in terms of spatial reasoning. One way to understand this problem more clearly is to think in terms, in psychological terms, about the modalities of cognition, the way you think. If you study psychology, there's this idea called mental modules, and there are different types of reasoning, spatial reasoning, natural reasoning, that is, why lightning strikes trees or how rivers flow and so forth. Social reasoning is immensely important. That's how people work, and what not to say and what you should say. Linguistic reasoning. Now the problem, this is the hardest. This is still, I've been working on this for 30 years and I've pretty much failed. But social reasoning is immensely complex. Linguistic reasoning is a little simpler. Spatial reasoning is easy. Natural reasoning is fairly easy. And that's why we do these. But if you really want to get a good entertainment medium, social reasoning is what you have to do. Think about it. What are movies about? Have you ever watched, would you watch a movie called The Nobody of the Rings? It's about people. Imagine a movie without any people in it. There are a few. One of the greatest movies of all time, Koyaanisqatsi, has no people in it. But that's very special. Movies are about people,
and the narrative is it's big but not linear. In Koyaanisqatsi, it's there, but it's not linear storytelling.
It's all about people. That's what we have to be doing, and we don't have any games that are truly about people. We do have. Let me get something here to show you. Where is that? Here it is. Here we go. We do have the way they try to do people in games is they'll start with a conventional game, and then we'll play the game for a little while because it's interactive. And then we pause the game to tell you a little bit of story. And then after we told you some story, we go back to playing the game some more. And then the story and the game. And if you do it fast enough, it's a story game. And
nice one.
Yeah, that's not how to do it. So that's the best we've got right now. And obviously we need a lot more work. However, doing interpersonal interactions are very, very complex, and the algorithms for them are especially difficult. I've worked on this, like I say, for 30 years, and it's difficult. Any individual interaction is not too difficult. But, well, for example, suppose there's this girl that I really like, and I'd like to have a date with her. So I give her flowers. Well, it's easy to figure out, well, if you give her flowers, she'll probably like you a little bit more. But then if this were a game, I just keep giving her more and more and more and more flowers, more and more and more. And pretty soon she'd jump into bed with me. No.
Yeah, that's a simple mechanics.
So how do you go from one flowers to many flowers. How do you put the
Mm,
limitation on that? And that in itself is actually, that problem is actually pretty simple to
mm,
fix. But, the romance is something of immense complexity.
mm,
And we're nowhere near doing a game that can handle romance.
mm, mm,
Let's talk about God as a storyteller. So
mm,
God creates the universe and all these people in it. Now, if God were a good storyteller, then every single person would go through an arc
mm,
that would ultimately end in he wins, he's good, he's happy, or whatever.
yeah,
But
okay.
instead, we
Mm,
get all these people doing all these different things, and many of them failing, and many of them turning out horrible, and so forth. Well, the point of all of this is that God allows free will. God allows people to make mistakes.
mm,
And it is that interactivity, in effect, that makes it interesting.
mm,
In other words, if a storyteller creates this nice plot where everything works out very cleverly, and in the end
mm,
they live happily ever after, or they're all dead,
mm,
then that's a very nice story, but it's ultimately just a story. If you want it to be interactive, if you want your player to really get into it, you've got to give the player interactivity. And that means you've got to let the player fail.
mhm,
Failure is
mhm,
the shadow makes the light.
mhm,
Failure defines success. Without failure, success means nothing.
mhm,
And so you don't want to have this nice structure where everything works out perfectly. You want to have a big mess where the player is struggling against a million problems. And then when the player succeeds, the player can genuinely feel, I did something good.
mhm,
But that's the only if the player can fail will the player feel good on success.
mhm. Yeah, that's a good statement. I want to take this as a final statement already, because yeah, I totally agree. We need more good education games, and especially, uh, yeah, addressing the ecological crisis we have. Thank you very much, Chris Crawford, for sharing your. Yeah,
I have one last item.
of course.
About 8 months ago, well, actually, about 8 years ago, I built a completely new version of Balance of the Planet, far superior to the original one. About 8 months ago, I asked a couple of programmers if they were willing to revise it so it could be done directly over the web. And they've been working on that. We were hoping to have it ready by August 1st, but they're a few weeks late. So we're going to have it out within a month, I guess. And
Okay.
so it will be up on my website and
Hmm.
people can play it there. So, but
Okay, great. We can include the link later in this talk when it's on YouTube, so people can find it immediately. Because I really recommend to play it for everyone. It's a great thing for me to see it in the exhibition when people are sitting there and playing it. We put an old monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, like in the late 90s or mid
yeah,
90s,
yeah,
into it. So it's really. You can really feel it, and also from all the parents, mostly parents with their children in the exhibition. For all the parents, they can uh, it's time travel for them. They immediately in that time, and um, so it's really enjoyable and educational, as a good game should be. Thank you very much, Chris Crawford, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for everything you have done for the game development community and for your pioneer work for games and ecology. All the best,
okay.
and thank you.
You're welcome.